Yeah.
Thank
But
you.
if I were to give advice to the kids that I'm working with and to and future children who are pursuing, who are getting as much as education, I will. So three things: um, follow your passion, get as much education and training as possible, and never give up.
That's right.
Awesome. And honestly, I don't think we could end it any better than that. Thank you. All right. Well, if you guys want to go ahead and take your seats, we will kind of switch around again. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you.
We really appreciate it.
Yes.
I learned a lot. That was great.
Yeah, I know. That was really great. So, if some of you want to share, as we're in this next bit, just to kind of think about on your sheets, what are some of the things that your son or daughter likes to do, and what are some of their talents or skills?
Or for yourself, what are some things that you like to do, your own talents and skills?
And if some of you
I
want
was
to,
going to use those. Oh, no. Kidding.
you're a mess. So, and if some of you want to kind of share some of the thoughts that we can probably take just like 2 or 3 of you to share some of the thoughts that you've had about what you're perceiving as your dreams for the future and the role of employment, and how some of those skills might be able to translate into a job someday. So, do you have a couple of you who might want to share that? Clay says, "Don't be shy."
Yeah, don't be shy, folks.
All right. I will share. I will share.
Go.
I guess because I am a mom too. I'm Andy's mom.
We never really said that, did we?
Yeah,
We
we
never
didn't really
said
say that. So
we go
Stella
with
is
you.
Clay's mom. I'm Andy's mom. And so when Andy was, when Andy was little, I really never envisioned that the thing that would stop my heart at 16 years old, when he was 16 years old, was that he took off on his bike to go to Publix to ask for a job. Yes, Andy.
I was there. Some they brought me.
Yeah.
I think in the school. Also, Maggie was there too.
I know. Sometimes you have to overcome those things, but
Stick over us. She did stick up for me. And one girl, she came by to see me. That was Rachel Wiley. She did stick up for me and Maggie.
and Andy, I think that's a good point, because it's really those friends that you made in high school that you saw working at Publix. And when he met those friends and he saw that those kids were starting to get jobs, that's where, when we were driving home from school one day, he was like, "Mom, I want to get a job at Publix." And I was like, okay. And in my head, I'm thinking, we got to figure out how to do a job coach and voc rehab. And I don't know how any of those things work, because, we just barely got into transition age. And so I go and I start to cook dinner. And meanwhile, I told my daughter to go get him because it was done. And I'd been on the phone with my mom. Well, he wasn't in his room, his bike, and then we went and checked outside and his bike was gone. And I noticed I had 2 messages on my phone. And he said, "Mom, I go to Publix, I go get a job, you come get me." And I'm terrified. I'm like, and so I frantically called Publix and I said, "My son's there. Can you please make sure that he doesn't leave?" Because it was starting to get dark and I didn't want him riding his bike home in the dark. We'd ridden it probably, 50 times.
A car.
I know you need a car, and we're working on that. But he had gone up to the front service counter. He'd asked, "How do you get a job?" And he had some friends who were working there, like we were saying. And
What am I going to do? I think it was kind of and then it was with me.
oh yes,
And then I can say, and talk to my mother, I can say, we can share meetings. Sure.
Yes. And so Andrew Andon did help you with that. And so, and he had gone exactly where he was supposed to. He couldn't figure out the kiosk, and he needed my help with that. And that's what he was calling about. But they were so impressed with his initiative, they said, yeah, we'll be happy to hire him and give him, 5 to 10 hours a week, which is what we wanted as a high schooler. That's appropriate amount of hours for him in high school. And then he also, but see, what was interesting about that is we went afterwards and told, his education team was, he's got this job. We're so excited. And they're like, oh, okay, well, you don't really need voc rehab anymore because he's already accomplished this goal. And once they provide job coaching, he's fine. And it's like, well, this is our job in high school. And it may be for many years after because it's a great, social kind of situation. But he's also interested in photography. And we think that he can also be a great photographer. So even though we love this job, we're not going to stop there. Right. There's still more that he can contribute to the world. And so I think that's where seeing that brighter future comes in. Absolutely. And the way we figured out the photography was just because my husband's a designer and we kind of kept putting a camera in his hands and we saw he was good at that, and so that's kind of how those stories manifest themselves. So do any of you have anything you want to share about ideas you have for the future? Okay.
I think that's one thing that we've kind of all seen through all of this, especially hearing all of these fine young people up here, is how you can see each individually where the focus has been on their talents and what they've enjoyed doing. And you take that and you build on it. And what we did with the band is a great example because Clayton does love music so much. And we wanted that to be a part of how he could incorporate his gifts and talents into something that could be something he could get paid for one day. So you have to kind of really think outside of the box and create opportunities that will allow doors to open. And I think all of these examples have been wonderful to show the importance of listening to what their dreams and hopes and desires are, and then really begin to think how can we create that perfect life for them for their future.
Well, and I think one of the challenges that can come up is you, even as a parent or as an individual, may have these dreams, but you're like, how do I share this with the professionals in my life, right? How do I make sure everybody's on board for this? And so what we have as an example here is, if you look on the back of this, we have some examples of vision statements that, and this first one we're giving you an example of is for a younger student. And of course, this is a little girl in pre-K, and her mom created this vision statement for her because at 4 years old, you're not crafting your own vision statement unless you're very, very precocious. And but what I love about this vision statement that this mom writes is she says, in her future, we envision her doing work that she enjoys and that makes her feel productive. We envision our daughter living a happy and meaningful life surrounded by love and support. And this is the vision statement that this mom shares at the IEP meetings. And it outlines her strengths, what works for her, what doesn't work, what motivates her. And I think it's so important to even start out at that age to give the professionals in their lives the idea that we are working toward this goal in the community. And that was always really helpful for us too. You can go ask Dad. Go ask Dad. That was always really helpful for us as a family too, when we go into these IEP meetings, to say, social skills, working, being included in the classroom are really important, because we know that someday we want him to be working among the rest of the community. That's and if he's not included now, how is he going to learn that? And so that was one of the points that we made when we were having those conversations. And so as he got older, then we had Andy be more involved in crafting the vision statement. And so we'd ask him, what do you want to put in there? And he had put, I get my own studio. I get a small house. I also work at Publix, and I want to go to college and live in a new house by myself. That hurt a little bit, but it's important for him to be able to share that vision about what he wants for the future and showing what his strengths and skills are. And really, these vision statements they're just kind of simple things that you can do in Microsoft Word or I do them in Canva. So an online tool.
And that can be a wonderful thing to take to your IEP meeting.
Absolutely.
And for the student themselves to say, these are the things that are really important to me.
To me. Mm-hmm. That's right.
And so I think that that's really where we want to make sure that as we start any of these meetings with professionals, we're sharing that vision of the future that we're constructing. And it's going to start off parent-led if your child's younger, right? And then it'll move on to being more student-led, ideally over time. And the ways we've done, there are lots of ways we've done that. We've done it with this, one-page vision statement. And I know Andy, with his teacher, one year they created a PowerPoint, and it talked about the kind of photography he was interested in, and actually the kind of photography he wasn't interested in doing. He doesn't really like taking pictures of people. It's more about cityscapes and landscapes. So those are some other things that you can do.
And those can also be given as you begin to work with community leaders and anyone that might be working with your young person in the future. When they do get jobs, that could be something that can be given as a way of introducing them to their new position, to their employee, the folks that they work with. I just think it's a really good thing to continue on with and update as they get older and involved in different aspects of their life. We all need vision statements.
Absolutely. Well, the other thing I like about the vision statements is it talks about, you list a person's strengths.
Yep.
And we should all be, as we're, throughout life, right, assessing our kids' strengths and making sure that we're helping to magnify those. And then this exercise can be really helpful too in showing how you can transform those strengths into actual work skills. So this is kind of taking the example that we talked about. Remember Poppin' Joe Steffi, and how he had this kettle corn business. So some of his strengths that he had were that he was hardworking. Well, that can end up in his case, he could maybe stay on task for 6 hours or stay on task for 4 hours because he's hardworking. All right. We know that he's energized by repetitive tasks. Well, that means that he can fill bags of popcorn repetitively and not get bored by that. He actually really enjoys it. And then we also know he's good at following directions. Well, to make that an actual work skill, that means he needs to be able to follow that specific kettle corn recipe, right? So there's also this story recently about a young woman with Down syndrome who was a really great baker. And she ended up selling these cinnamon chocolate chip cookies, which sound fabulous. And she would need to, as part of her job, not just be a good baker, but she would need to know how to run that oven, follow that recipe. And so you help the person transform those strengths that they have into actual work skills.
I like that.
And so then,
or another good example would be Clay. With his musical talents and is now his job with percussion section in the bands, and so even so the things which for him could really be a lifelong thing.
Absolutely.
And really, we have to think about this as a continuum where people are moving from one step to another to prepare for employment. And it's never too late, but it's also wonderful if we can start as early as possible, right? And so we kind of constructed this continuum of work to show how someone, and this guy right here is actually Isaiah, and we did a great photo shoot with Isaiah at his work location at a restaurant, and kind of following what someone like Isaiah could do to take those steps to get to employment. So, for example, if your son is interested in cooking and working in the kitchen, then you start off, doing chores to clear the table and help in the kitchen, maybe gathering the ingredients for dinner and just talking about the cooking process. And over time, you can teach them how to do some basic recipes, like
Mhm.
how to make fruit salad, how to make soup or a sandwich. And you kind of make sure that you're giving them those skills along the way. And then you move on to the school and community activities. And so somebody who's interested in cooking, well, you could have them do a scout, you have them be in scouts and do a merit badge in cooking. And you learn some of those skills. It could be that they're taking a home ec class in school. And so they're learning, again, some more of those skills. And then we do leadership and volunteer work. Maybe an appropriate volunteer work for someone interested in cooking would be to go work in a local food ministry. Helping to make food, also helping to hand out food, and then they're getting some of that volunteer experience.
And volunteer work can also lead into paid employment down the road too. So you don't want to negate volunteering and say, oh, well, we don't want to volunteer because we want to be paid. Absolutely. But when we volunteer, a lot of times it could open up doors for the future, especially if it's something that they're interested in and they like a whole lot.
Yeah,
Well,
volunteer work can be a means, not the end. but
Not
it
the
certainly
end, but a
be
means
definitely a
to get
means.
there. Absolutely.
Well, and it's just like with any student, they end up needing to do a lot of volunteer work to put that on their resume.
Mhm.
But then we also want to make sure that they're taking
Yeah.
that next step. And it can be work experiences. So say your son or daughter, or especially here, Isaiah, so say he's done these merit badges in cooking. He has taken home ec. He's worked at the food ministry. He's got a lot of experience. And then you know a friend who runs a catering business, and she's going to be catering the wedding for a friend of yours. Then you say, you know what? Isaiah's got a lot of experience here. Do you think he might be able to be one of your paid servers that night? And that's where you have to then go into moving into paid work experiences and building a relationships with people who are in that industry and asking the questions. And sometimes that's, can be intimidating, but that's where we start with friends and family and say, hey, we know you've got, this coming up, and do you think this might be a possibility? Well, then once somebody then has that under their belt of having the volunteer work, and then to be able to say, hey, you know what? I worked 5 or 6 weddings, and I helped with catering there. Can I maybe get a job? These are some of the experiences I've had to get a job at this restaurant.
It looks great on the resume.
And then they're able, and like Megan said, you need to be sure that when someone has a disability, you're doing still all the same things you would do for anyone else, as far as creating a resume to build the case that they're a good employee.
That's right.
And also building those skills at the same time.
Mhm.
All right, so I think I am now turning this over to you. Is that what I'm doing?
Well, I think we're going to kind of do it
Oh, yes,
together,
we're tag
remember?
teaming.
Yeah,
We're
we're
tag
tag teaming here.
So we're going to talk about some things you can do to start early. And I think we're just going to kind of share a few of our personal examples of what we did here.
And that's one of the things I'd said early on about the chores. We actually at our house called a to-do list, because I don't know about you all, but I live by a to-do list. If I don't have a list that I can check off, I feel like I haven't accomplished anything. And that's what we've set up for Clayton at home. He has a to-do list. So every morning he has to get up and he has certain things that he has to do before his day begins. If he goes to work that day, he knows he is to finish that to-do list before he goes to work. And what that has done is that has really taught him about responsibility. It's taught him the importance of keeping his responsibilities up before he goes and does something else. At our house, we have a motto: you work before you play. And so that's what we've instilled in our children too, is that if once your work is done, then you can play. And so he knows, he's learned that pretty much early on, that that's just part of it. And those skills though have transferred now into employment. It is transferred into, he knows he has to be at work on time. He knows when he gets to work, these are the tasks and things that he has to accomplish before he's finished, and before he can get on his phone, or before he can do those things, as we all should do. Now, we all break the rules. We know that. We all, don't always do exactly what we're supposed to do. But I think instilling those tasks and responsibilities early on really helps prepare them for the future too.
Absolutely. And I think you can also do things like when they're small, it might be that you're creating picture charts and saying, this is what you need to do. I know with my kids too, you start off when they're little having to have some carrot as motivation, right? And that might be screen time. It might be some time to do something fun. So I think, and for Andy, I know his was, oh, if you want to go hang out with such and such friend, you got to get your chore done.
Right.
And so it was kind of hurtful at the time.
Yeah.
But it's what you needed to do to learn, right? And so, so it's important. And sometimes we have to demonstrate what we want,
Right.
or break it into smaller tasks. And sometimes we might need mnemonic aids too. Like we used to put kind of the words of where his clothes went on his dresser, so he knew where to put different things.
That's good.
And sometimes as parents, I don't know if you'll second this, but I think sometimes we also have to give them chores, even though it might not be exactly how we would want it done.
Oh, exactly. Yes. And we have to
Yeah.
let them feel accomplished and do it. I know Clayton might remember this. Remember we were learning how to fold towels.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
But he of course it was not the way that I would fold my towels, but he felt so accomplished that he did that. I wasn't about to touch those towels. So we have to allow them to succeed without always correcting too.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because, I don't do things exactly like I was taught either, the way my parents did. I had to kind of add my own feel to it, and that's what we have to allow them to do also.
Great.
So-
And I do think those chores are so key. And it's even when they're little to start with, hey, everybody's got to take their plates to the sink,
That's
know?
right.
So another kind of way to prepare for work is by getting involved in the community, because that's how you make relationships with people. You meet people who might be able to be future employers, including and also future coworkers. Like we talked about with Andy, it was important for him to be hanging out with those other kids to see what they were doing.
That's right. And if they're not involved in school and doing different things, it's going to be really hard for them to be with their typical peers after school. So it's important that you cultivate those relationships while they're young, while they're in high school. And that's what we always did too. We always made sure that Clayton was involved in everything that his typical peers were doing throughout the day. And that made it very important for him. And so now, as his friends, of course, have graduated and went on, he still stays connected with them, as best as he can in the community. And that's very, very important to be sure and do that.
Yeah, and I know, and like Andy had mentioned before, as far when Harold asked him what if some of his favorite activities were, he's got lacrosse where he's met people, and mountain biking. And the thing is, they make connections that way. But that's also a form of responsibility, because I remember mountain biking sticking because that was the first activity where he would pack his own stuff. Everything else was a chore of me packing it for him. But
he
that's
himself.
Yeah, that's an opportunity and it's also an opportunity to discover what their talents and skills are as we do those things. We learned that team sports, well, as far as soccer was not a favorite, right? So,
well, it's funny because I think the community involvement is so important. But Clayton, you'll probably remember he was working with a job coach for a while, and he still does. But this particular one, we have a very local radio station in our community, and they walked into the radio station and asked if they would hire Clayton. And just out of the blue, just walked in, and they weren't expecting the owner to say yes, but he did. And he immediately started at this radio station, and it's local. You wouldn't have heard it anywhere else. It was just our little town.
Radio Liberty.
Radio Liberty, and Clayton would work 2 hours a week doing the weather online. And how we prepared him for that is kind of like what you were saying. He would look at the weather, the pictures of the weather, what it was going to be like that day, either sunny or partly cloudy or anything. And then that also helped his speaking abilities and helped him prepare for something that we weren't even really thinking about for his future with the motivational speaking. But he was on the radio, and he would one minute be talking about the weather, and the next minute he would be singing Johnny Cash. So it went from one to another. But what an amazing opportunity that was for him to be involved in the community, build those relationships that cultivated things for his future. So
yeah,
that's great. And I think that's another example too of what we've got here as far as developing leadership. I think sometimes our students with intellectual disabilities might get pigeonholed into being the recipients of service and leadership, when also they are also great agents for
Absolutely.
providing leadership and service.
That's great.
And so, Andy, actually, can you tell me what's going on in that picture? Look up there. What's going on in that picture? What were you doing that day?
I was hanging out with my old sibling lot.
But what were you guys doing?
I was doing like scout stuff. I was building like my neighbor Chris. He said he is checked out to me. We are building pictures and networks.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the day
I was
that.
busy because I was doing something for you, for me and another something to do. I had new stuff, and I had new virtual email for you both. You can send me an email like blackeyedpeas.com. You can look at it, you want it.
Okay. I don't know that that'll go to you though, to be honest.
Serious.
Okay. But really, so what was happening that day was they were building bike racks and benches as part of their Eagle Scout project. And actually, so Andy had there were three boys in their troop who were all working on their Eagle Scout projects at the same time.
I have my own.
And there got to be a point when, you know, all the other boys were kind of 16 and they were starting to drive and date, and they were less interested in completing their merit badges and their projects. And because Andy was still kind of moving forward and getting his done, they ended up going with him. And then Andy scouted out this project, and he and another boy, and these are guys who don't have diagnosed disabilities, but he was really able to be the leader in his troop to get them to get those things done.
That's great.
And so I think it's important to realize that they can serve in that capacity too. And by doing that, they learn those responsibilities for completing tasks and for motivating other people.
That's
And
right.
also public speaking, because that can come out of it too.
That's right. That's great. Clayton also, throughout his community, sings at a lot of our ball games, sings the
Mhm.
national anthem at a lot of
And also,
games.
I do a lot of singing at the community fair, like
At the transition fairs?
Yes,
Yeah, the transition fairs, yes. So that's opened up a lot of doors for you by doing that, you know,
Yeah.
within the community too. So
great.
And so, I mean, I hope that anybody who's participating can kind of think about what are 2 steps that you can take at home right now or in the community to just start building some of those skills, whether it's assigning a specific chore, or maybe enrolling in a martial arts class that your child has expressed an interest in, just to kind of think about some of those things that might be helpful. And now we're going to turn the time over to Dr. Kleiner to address some of the concerns that people sometimes have about employment.
Okay, thank you. People have a variety of concerns, obviously, and for some it is does my son or daughter have is their disability too significant for them to work, and it's amazing the kinds of opportunities that are coming now. And for others, it may be whether the job environment is safe. And almost always, employers and if your son or daughter has a job coach are very much able to work in terms of ensuring the environment is safe. Sometimes when individuals get jobs, they have supports like job coaches or other things, and they're worried about, okay, all right, I have these, but when I no longer have them, will I still be able to keep my job? And almost always those kinds of supports, they stay in place or they're faded gradually. And transportation may also be an issue. And we've heard that Sometimes people ride their bikes. Sometimes they get a ride with their sister. Sometimes they get a ride with their mom. Though sometimes their mom takes them shopping, but instead of the work, they're supposed to yeah. But and sometimes there's buses or taxis, and I realize, especially in rural areas, transportation can be an issue, and can require some certainly some creative solutions. One of the greatest barriers, or perceived barriers, that families often see for their son or daughter is fear about losing government benefits, and especially SSI, supplemental security income, and the health care, the Medicaid that goes along with it, and supplemental security income is a major source of support for many individuals with significant disabilities, and it does also come with health care, with Medicaid, and the good news is that if your son or daughter receives SSI, if that is their government cash benefit that they receive, your son or daughter is always better off working. We'll go through that in a second.